Good day, this is Jove Aguas, and welcome to my lectures in philosophy. Today I will be discussing about teaching the philosophy of the human person. One of the new subjects or courses in senior high school is an introduction to the philosophy of the human person. And there are some teachers who may be new to this subject or in teaching philosophy in the senior high school. So I am presenting or discussing some of the approaches and methods that we can utilize in teaching philosophy of the human person. This lecture is divided into three parts. In the first part, I will be talking about the approaches and methods, and then the second part will focus on the capabilities of the students, and the third part I will talk about some pointers in teaching philosophy of the human person. Welcome to the third part or third lecture of my discussion on uh, methods and approaches in teaching philosophy of the human person. In the first two lectures, I focused on the teaching process, especially the role of the teacher, what methods or approaches the teacher may utilize in teaching in general. Of course, we are talking of teaching a philosophy subject. And then in the second, I talk about the student capabilities, some of the student capabilities that we need to develop in them in order for them to really progress in, in their learning. And I also discuss about some activities that will encourage active learning on the part of the students. Now, for this third part of the lecture, I will focus now on some of the pointers in teaching philosophy of the human person. Uh, we know that uh, there are really very few philosophy graduates who teach philosophy as a course in college, and some of the teachers who may handle this course are not really graduates of philosophy, or if they have taken philosophy as a course, maybe just few units of, uh, of philosophy. So it's quite common that the teacher who handles philosophy subject is not a philosophy graduate uh, teacher. But of course, uh, we need to teach the course, and it would help if we have some pointers on to how to teach uh, this particular course. I mean, philosophy of the human person. Okay. Now, the pointers I'm going to talk about may of course they are intended for teaching philosophy, but they can actually be applied or utilized uh, in, in teaching other courses as well. So let's go to some of these pointers. First, teaching for understanding and appreciation. Closely related to the deployment of active learning experiences, the one that we talked about in the previous lecture, is an in-depth understanding of a topic. Meaning, if you are the teacher, you really need to study to master the lesson, the subject matter. And intellectual capabilities are developed through practice in their use. So you can develop these intellectual capabilities by applying them. Okay. So uh, such understanding must not only be at the cognitive level, meaning that you have memorized the lesson. Okay. It must be transformed into attitude in the affective level. So meaning to say, you don't just understand, you don't just memorize the lesson, you imbibe. You that understanding is transformed into a kind of uh, positive attitude about the lesson, because you can only be effective in imparting the lesson if you yourself are convinced about what you are teaching. Okay? I remember what St. Thomas Aquinas said about teacher or about teaching. He said that there are three kinds of teaching, three types of teaching. The first one is to instruct, giving instruction. So you are just giving the lesson, you are maybe just lecturing. The second is to convince. You need to convince your student that what you are, the lesson is true. And you cannot convince your students if you are not convinced yourselves about the lesson, about what you are teaching. And the third one, of course, he said, is to defend, to argue, to defend your lesson, to defend the truth of your teaching. So again, you cannot defend it, you cannot argue for it if you are not convinced yourself. So there should be a kind of transformation from the cognitive to the affective. Okay? So understanding must be transformed into appreciation. So as a teacher, we need to understand the lesson and we also need to appreciate the lesson so that we can impart this, share this to our students. Our students will also understand the lesson and they will also appreciate the lesson. Because if they only understand but they don't appreciate, I think we did not fulfill our role as teachers of making them appreciate our lesson. So if they understand, they will just answer this in the test, in their exams, and they will probably get high grades or good grades. But when they go out of the classroom, they leave behind everything in the classroom. The lessons that they learn, they leave them behind in the classroom. When they go outside, lessons are gone. So, philosophy of the human person is one of those philosophy subjects whose very nature and objective is not only to develop the mind, but to form the character of the students. Of course, also of the teacher. So we don't just, in philosophy of the human person, it's not enough that we gain an understanding of what the human person is. We need to appreciate what the human person is. And what is the better way of appreciating the, the nature of the human person than forming our character as good human beings, as good human persons? And this goes both to the student and to the teacher. So the appeal and the approach must therefore be based on the experiences of both the students and the teacher. Because we are not just talking about the human person. The human person is actually us, the students and the teacher. We are discussing something about ourselves, or not just something, about ourselves as human beings, as human persons. Now, one of the approaches that we normally utilize or use in philosophy, in teaching philosophy of the human person, is the phenomenological approach. And this is an approach based on the personal experience, which for me is the best approach. So aside from explaining the lesson, discussing the lesson, we have to draw from our own personal experiences or from the experiences of the students in order for us and for them to understand the lesson. Because now they can identify, they can now relate with the lesson because they have their own personal experiences about the lesson. Or the teacher shares his own personal or her own personal experiences about the lesson. Okay? So, let's go now to some specific pointers in teaching this course. First, we need to be honest and modest about the significance or relevance of our subject. We have to consider the subject, our course, the course that we're teaching, in the context of all the other subjects that our students are taking up. Because this is not their only subject. This is not their only course. Yes, it is relevant, your course or subject is relevant, but so are the other courses or subjects. They are as relevant, as significant as your own subject or your own course. So take note that this subject will not make them good human persons overnight. Simply because you talk about, uh, say, man as a religious being or man as the person as an intersubjective being, you talk about human relationship, then they're going to be, nice to everybody. That will not happen overnight. They will have to develop a good understanding and appreciation of their being human persons in the course of their studies before they can, you know, uh, apply the lessons to themselves. So the end result will depend not only on the part of the teacher, but it will also depend on their part. So if you engage them, as we have said about active learning, if you engage them or provide them with active learning experiences, then might be able to take in the lessons, appreciate the lesson, and apply those lessons in their own lives. So we must not overemphasize its relevance and what the subject can offer. Of course, we want them to understand the importance, the relevance, but let's not overdo it. The course requirements and demands must be proportionate. Otherwise, the students will be overwhelmed with all the requirements, and they may even fail to appreciate the subject. Because we want them to appreciate the subject, we want them to understand the subject, we bombard them with all the requirements as if that's the only course that they are taking up in the semester on this school year. So instead of them appreciating your course, they may in fact hate your course or hate the subject. Next, make the lecture or the discussion and illustration as clear and as simple as possible. Let's not make philosophy too complicated. Okay? So making the lecture clear and simple does not mean spoon feeding them. Okay? It does not mean spoon feeding them. Simple terms and language that they can easily understand will facilitate understanding and will encourage students to participate more in the discussion. It's not about using those highly complex, highly technical terms because sometimes they are not uh, they are not helpful. They serve as turn-offs for students. So avoid highly technical or abstract terms. If it cannot be avoided, elaborate further and give concrete examples, give more applications. Next, lectures must be related to and built on what has been previously learned. So we cannot just start our lesson from here, there, without really connecting or relating them to what they have already learned. So it must be progressive. So you have to connect this new lesson, for example, connect that new lesson to the previous lesson or previous topic. So ideas or new skills are better learned when they are related to what the students have already learned or understood. These previously learned ideas or skills serve as stepping stones in learning new and unknown ones. So you don't start them off with something really nothing for them. So use the previous lesson as a stepping stone, springboard for the next lesson. Lectures can be connected through critical questions from previous lessons. So you can probably provide a recapitulation, connect that to the previously discussed topic, probably ask some questions about those topics, and then that becomes your springboard, your connection to the new lesson. So clarify and answer their questions with sincerity because uh, we should always be uh, honest or we should always be considerate to students when they ask questions. And I think uh, questions from the students will be sincere if you will give them sincere answers. Now, relate lessons to personal experiences of students. I said it's very important if we follow the phenomenological method or approach that we connect our lessons to experiences. So if we discuss purely concepts, theories, and principles in laws, and we fail to relate these concepts, these principles, these theories to their personal experiences and to those happening around them, then the students might not be able to identify with the lesson. So the lessons are up there in the clouds. They cannot relate with the lesson. So before we know it, their minds are already hovering somewhere else. You know, they are there in our classroom, in our classes, but their minds are somewhere. Especially in this time of pandemic where we cannot really see our students. We are just facing our laptops or desktop or smartphones or our gadgets, and we cannot see our audience, our students. So if we don't engage them, if we don't share, connect the lessons to their personal experiences, well, for all you know, they are no longer there. They are logged in to your online class, but they are already somewhere. So provide a variety of examples, both experiential and practical. Philosophy of the human person is not an abstract or purely speculative subject. It's a more practical. It's more practical and attitudinal. So when you talk of interpersonal relationships, then we give example about interpersonal relationships. If we discuss about their role in the society, then we have to give examples about their role in the society. If we talk about uh, uh, religion or man as a religious subject, then we have to connect our lesson to their religious or spiritual experiences. If we discuss their being existential, then we have to relate those topics to their own uh, experiences as an existential subject or being. So there are many examples we can give to students. So examples must be understandable and related to the experiences of the students. Students must be able to identify with examples or illustrations. So it's always very important to connect with the students by giving them examples based on personal experiences. And then the next is to challenge students to ask relevant questions and encourage them to share insights and thoughts. We go back to the approaches of teaching, so we can now apply those higher approaches, like for example, the collaborative approach, the constructivist approach, you know, and then encourage them to share the insights and thoughts. So more things are learned, more ideas are conceived, are thought of when people ask relevant questions. Knowledge is propagated when we share ideas and insights. So students are full of questions and insights. If we can only encourage them to ask questions, provide the opportunity, the situation, the right condition, the right experience for them to ask questions. It's better for them to ask questions because at least we can know what they are thinking. And if we can connect to what they're thinking, we are doing our job well as teachers. Next is to facilitate discussions and free exchange of ideas. Again, this is still related to the approaches of teaching that we have discussed. So we are just applying now those approaches in teaching philosophy of the human person. In group discussion, the teacher is more of a facilitator or a moderator. He introduces the lesson, explains the topic, and then he allows students or she allows students to participate in the discussion. So it's very important that we encourage them to share, exchange their ideas or their insights. In this way, we empower students and they will feel good about themselves. That's one thing very important. Make your students feel good about themselves because, at least they have their own ideas, they are able to express their ideas, and they feel good about sharing good thoughts. And of course, we have to be appreciative of the ideas that they share in the class. We cannot embarrass them in the class by, by giving some insights that we think are off, but uh, maybe we can just redirect redirect the ideas into the lesson. So later on, when they go out of our classroom, they can conduct their own investigation, they can have their own reflection, they can have their own analysis, they can have their own evaluation and assessment of the lessons and other things that affect their lives. The next is to reinforce the lessons with additional learning activities. So after the lecture or after the group discussion, after the illustration, there should be an exercise or group work to reinforce the lesson, or maybe additional activities, readings perhaps, assignment perhaps. But of course, this should not be very burdensome on the part of the student, because if you give them, again, burdensome requirements, when they leave the class, they feel, very fulfilled, and then when you give them assignment, they feel very burdened with assignment. We miss the whole thing. And so, provide the students with the opportunity to discuss the lessons and answer enjoyable exercises for them to appreciate more the lesson. So, lecture is not sufficient, nor does demonstrating alone ensures adequate understanding. These two must be combined with exercises, with some activities, with some, probably additional readings, of course, for their own, for additional knowledge, for additional information, so they can have the opportunity to do things, do the lessons, or further the lessons themselves. So this further enhances their understanding and appreciation of the topic. So it all boils down really to really connecting and making the students appreciate our lessons. And philosophy of the human person is supposed to be a very fulfilling course. If we should go beyond being too cognitive, too intellectual, too mental about the course. Okay, and then of course we should follow up, encourage students to continue their lesson, continue learning. This is one, sometimes this is neglected, no? Following up, encouraging students to learn more. But this is still a necessary part of any learning activity. This involves frequent check on the students' progress with regards to understanding of the lessons and their general attitude towards the course. So we ask them from time to time how they are in the class, how they are coping up with the lesson, with the requirements, etc. So in the course of follow-ups, we have the opportunity to correct any errors that may have been committed, or clarify certain aspects of the lessons that are not fully understood, and to encourage the students to further master, understand, and appreciate the course or the subject. Okay? So lastly, we should know the progress of our students' performance. Okay? So it's important that we know whether they are getting the lesson right, whether we are creating or uh, 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 we meet the expectations of the students, or they are gaining better appreciation of the lessons. Of course, we also need to know their grades. So it's not just about whether they appreciate the lesson, but whether they are really improving in their performance. So we need to ask to give them some performance tasks, fair exams, and of course inform them of the result of the exams, because at the end of the day we still have to give them grades. So from time to time the students must be updated as to their performance, their grades, their scores, the areas where they are improving, and the areas where they must further improve. So we must rate our students on their actual performance. We give them grades not on estimated potential performance, but on the skill that was actually demonstrated, meaning actual performance in the class. So thank you very much for listening. That concludes the third part of this lecture on methods and approach in teaching philosophy of the human person. So thank you very much for listening. This is Job Aguas once again.